Hey everybody, welcome back to the shop. You know, about 5 years ago, I built this vanity and hardwood top and installed it in the bathroom I'm in right now. Now fast forward to today, and this top is showing some serious signs of wear. There's areas where the clear coat's chipped, and some areas where it's peeled off altogether. Now I could just refinish the top, but instead I'm going to build a brand new top with a different style sink and install a brand new faucet. So stay tuned. Now when it comes to hardwood tops like this, eventually the finish is going to need some attention. Now for this top, I used polyurethane, and for the most part, it held up really well. The chipping started along the edges of the sink basin where the finish doesn't have a chance to build up as thick. And in some areas, a small chip turned into a pretty large patch. So what I'm going to do is build a new top from 1-inch birch plywood and cover it with textured laminate from Wilson Art. The first thing I'm going to do is use a utility knife to break the silicone seal all the way around the backsplash. Then I'm going to use a hammer, chisel, and a big flat tip screwdriver to pry the backsplash out and remove it. Then I'm going to finish things up by using a chisel and some 50 grit sandpaper to clean up the caulking on the wall. When it comes to building the top, I'm going to start off by making a cardboard template. This allows me to get the exact angle of the wall, which in turn will let me cut the plywood for a really tight fit. You know, it can be easy to forget that walls aren't always built to a perfect 90 degrees. And if you have a big gap like the one shown here, you're going to have to fill it with caulk, and that just doesn't look as good. Now you could have the backsplash covered on top, but you'd still have a gap in the front. And since I'm not using a backsplash, I want to make sure I get this right. Now after I get the wall angle right, I'm going to sit the template back in place and trace around the top. Then I'm going to use a straight edge and a utility knife to cut it out. Now if you're anything like me, I definitely recommend putting some basic labels on this template, like which side faces up, along with a few reference points. The last thing you want to do is trace this thing upside down on the plywood and mess up all your angles. I'm not even going to mention how I know this. When it comes to making a laminate top, there's typically two materials you'd use, either plywood or particle board. Now I'm going to use 1-inch birch plywood. That's right, not 3/4, but 1 inch. Now you're not going to find this in any home store. This stuff consists of 16 thin layers glued together, which makes for a super strong and stable product. But if you don't have access to plywood, or you don't want to spend the extra money, particle board will work as well. Now I'm going to start by cutting my plywood slightly oversized. Then I'm going to trace the template on top and cut it out with the bandsaw. Then I'll trim everything down to the line with a disc sander. Now that the plywood's cut out, I'm going to place the sink basin on top and measure all the way around, just to double check that it's in the right spot. Then I'm going to double check the spacing of the faucet, mark the location of both holes, and use the spur bit to make the cut. Then I'm going to assemble and check everything one last time, including the drain stopper. Now you can see here how much of a difference this sink is from the last. I mean, it's pretty much the exact opposite. I went from a recessed sink to a basin that sits on top, and from a two-handle faucet to a single. Now the last step involves cutting out some 1/2 inch thick strips that'll get fastened around the edge of the plywood. This makes the top look like it's 1.5 inches thick instead of 1 inch. Alright, now I'm finally ready to start working with some laminate. This laminate comes from Wilson Art and has a look and feel of real wood. Now this stuff's pretty cool. I actually used this to make all the countertops in my kitchen a few years back, and my wife and I really like the way it turned out. You can actually feel the wood grain, which really helps make the dark oak stand out. I'm going to head over to the bandsaw and start cutting the 2 strips that'll go on the sides of the top first. I'm going to cut them about 1/4 inch oversize, and this helps make sure that the entire edge is covered when I go to glue them down. And then I'm basically going to do the same process with the top. I'm going to trace it on the laminate and then cut it with the bandsaw 1/4 inch oversize all the way around. Now when it comes to gluing down laminate, contact cement is the heavy hitter, and for good reason. This stuff is super strong and super permanent. This is why I cut all of my laminate pieces oversize, because once they're bonded down, that's it. There's no going back. To get rid of the excess material, I'll just come back with a router and use a flush cut bit to cut it down. Now if you've ever used contact cement, you know it's notorious for its strong smell. So if you don't want to be floating high somewhere up on cloud 9, you might want to have a few windows open. I'm going to apply contact cement to both the laminate and the plywood edge, and once they're dry, I'm going to go back and give each one a second coat. Then I'm going to hit it with a hair dryer to help speed up the drying process until each piece gets that tacky feeling. And once they're tacky, that's when you know they're ready to be bonded together. Now when it's time to put these two together, I'm going to make absolutely sure that all the plywood edge is covered, then press down to make the bond. Now when it comes to removing the excess laminate, I'm going to use a trim router and a flush cut bit. These bits are designed so that the cutting edge is dead flush with the bearing, so the laminate will be trimmed back even with the plywood. Now I've used many of these router bits from Bosch, and they've always been pretty good. They hold up well, cut well, and you can buy them from Lowe's for about 20 bucks. After I'm done routing, I'm going to use a sanding block to clean up any excess dust or contact cement, and then I'm going to bond the other laminate strip to the front edge of this top the exact same way. Now that I'm done with the sides, I'm going to move on to the top. And I'm going to repeat the exact same process. 2 coats of contact cement on both the laminate and the plywood. Wait till it's dry for that tacky feeling. Now when it comes to gluing down this big mat, being careful is everything. And taking into consideration that this stuff creates an instant bond, there is no room for error. So I'm going to cut a couple of 1/2 inch strips and lay them on top of the plywood. This allows me to lay the laminate in position, adjust it, then gradually pull the strips out to create the bond. Then the last thing I'm going to do is rub over the entire mat to make sure everything is pressed down firm. Now to finish this thing up, I'm going to go back to the trim router and run the flush cut bit all the way around the edge. Then I'm going to drill through the faucet and drain openings and route them out as well. And to add the finishing touches, I'm going to go around and hit all the edges and corners with some 150 grit sandpaper just to break the sharp edge. Then clean up any excess glue with some lacquer thinner. And guys, with that, I have a brand new top for our vanity, and I think it's going to go great with that sink we looked at earlier. Back in the bathroom, I'm going to shut off the water supply, disconnect all the plumbing, and then cut the silicone seal around the old top so I can remove it. Guys, just as a quick side note, if you're looking to get more storage out of your vanity, this could be a good option. Back when I built this, I made the top drawer a fold-down panel that reveals a storage board for curling irons and a hairdryer. It's something that's worked out really well, and my wife uses it every day. One thing that's going to need repaired is the hole in this wall, which was there since we moved in. I didn't fix it before because the old vanity top actually covered it, but this time around I fastened a new strip of drywall to the studs, covered it with a reinforced repair screen, and filled it in with joint compound. Now when it comes to repairing the wooden shiplap, I'm going to mix up some automotive body filler, fill in the damaged areas, and sand the fill down with a sanding block and some 50 grit paper. After blending in the joint compound, I'm going to run a bead of latex caulking up the corner to blend the seam between the drywall and the shiplap. Then I'll finish things up with a new coat of paint. Now I can finally start putting this thing together, starting with the faucet. For the basin, I'm going to run a bead of silicone along the bottom to help keep it in position, especially since the only thing holding the sink down is the drain. Then I'm going to install the drain, put the top back on the vanity, fasten it with some screws from underneath, and then reconnect all the plumbing. Then the last thing to do is caulk where both sides of the vanity top meet the wall. Now after I fire this thing up, I'm going to test both the hot and cold water, both of which are working good. Guys, thanks for joining me today and following along and building this new vanity top. You know, it's one of those projects that doesn't take a ton of time to do, but can make a huge impact on the look of a room. Now if you like woodworking, home improvement, and do-it-yourself content, check out some of my other videos and maybe even consider subscribing. Take care, and I'll see you next time.